everyone. We are going to, like Ani said, have this virtual parent academy where we have 10 different topics. Today, we're going to be talking about resiliency when it comes to children and adolescents. My name is Courtney. For those of you that don't know me, I've been doing these for the district since anywhere 2017, 2016, I started doing some of their parent courses or parent classes in person, and now we do them on Zoom. So this is great and welcome. Thank you all for coming. And here we go. So I'll kind of give you guys a little bit short snippet background about who I am and my credentials, or what makes me someone to listen to, I guess, when it comes to our children and adolescents. Like I said, my name is Courtney Kowalchuk. I am a psychotherapist. I've specialized in working with children and adolescents since about 2013, and I used to work for Rady Children's. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that entity, and we had outpatient psychiatry clinics, and I was working at the one in Oceanside. I don't even know if those exist anymore, or at least that one. I hear mixed things, and I haven't actually gotten in touch with anyone there. So so I got my licensure there. I've been specializing in children and adolescents since about 2015. And I've had kind of a slew of different experience. I've worked, I was in the military, active duty. I have worked in hospitals. I've worked in residential treatment centers for children and adolescents. So kind of a widespread. Now I have my own private practice, and I also work for North County Family Counseling Specialists, which is, we partner with the district, and I'm one of the therapists that does these trainings for you guys, or classes, whatever we want to call them. So we try to listen to feedback. We'll give you guys a feedback form at the end of the night through the chat, and the PowerPoint presentation is also going to be in there in PDF form and Keynote form if you're an Apple user. And anything that you need should be in there. We love feedback from you guys. We're here for you, and I love doing these. I also specialize in parenting. I am a trained positive discipline educator, and so I'm certified to do that. A lot of my methodology probably pulls from that, and a variety of other things. But so I love doing this. If you guys have anything that you feel like I'm missing, or a topic that you want to hear about that we're not covering this series, please don't hesitate to let us know, because I don't know, it's really helpful. I like that. So we'll give you guys a feedback form at the end too. Yeah, so welcome. Here we go. We're going to get into the talk. Thank you guys for being with us. I know some of you guys are driving to and fro, and picking people up and dropping people off and cooking dinner and maybe working. If you can't throw out comments on your video, or you don't feel comfortable doing that, throw it in the chat, because I definitely will be checking that throughout for questions or comments, because I will ask for some feedback. I like to do that in my presentations. So it's not just like me talking at you guys for 2 hours or an hour and 45. So, okay, we'll go ahead and press on now that we've got all that housekeeping out of the way. If I press play on this, it takes away the chat and I don't like that. So I'm going to go just keep it in this form, as long as everybody's okay with that in terms of the presentation, but everybody can see it okay, and it's big enough. All right. So when I do these parenting classes or courses, whatever you want to call them, I typically like to start with a quote, and just kind of gets us a little bit looser, gets us talking, gets you guys able to kind of share where you're at or what you think, kind of give you some space to chat up front. If anyone's feeling brave, I'm going to read the quote, and then we'll go ahead and have a little discussion about it. This one's from Jodi Picoult. The human capacity for burden is like bamboo, far more flexible than you would ever believe at first glance. And so the reason obviously I chose this quote is because this is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about resilience and our children or our teens' ability to flex with the tragedy of life or the things that happen. And so I thought that this was really pertinent and a really, I don't know, kind of strength-based perspective, looking at it from we're all more capable than we really think. And that's a positive way to start out. So does anybody have any feedback on that? Anybody agree, disagree, like the quote? Go ahead, Raquel. I see a raised hand. Awesome.
Thank you. I do agree with the quote. I think in this context, if we know exactly what having children or raising children entails, we probably wouldn't dare having children. But God has given us that capacity and that flexibility to take on what the responsibility and somehow have the wisdom to to raise them however we can.
Have the strength and the perseverance to go on, right? Yeah, Raquel, I really appreciate you saying that and sharing that, because that's a great way for us to start off this parenting like course journey, that just kind of stating it like it is, like parenting is really hard. It's really hard. This is like, I mean, I'll be honest, this is one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, and I feel like I've done a lot of hard things, but yeah, this is tough. And so I like you kind of gave a religious component of that, is like God gave you the capacity to do this, and we make it through and we make it work, and we're flexible. We get wisdom, we gain wisdom through experience. Yeah, so that's an awesome perspective to start out the class. So thank you so much, Raquel, for bringing that up. Let's see. Yep, Lisa says it's hard, such a blessing. Stephanie and Josh says it's a good quote. Yeah, because I think, I mean, obviously this stuff, we're talking about parenting being really hard, but I don't want to always bring this up in these courses, and I don't know, maybe I tend to, but like COVID and the pandemic, and like that was such, it's fresh on my mind. And even in this like Zoom, this whole setting that we use instead of meeting in person now, likely because of COVID, right? But like that's so fresh in our minds, that how challenging life can be sometimes, whether it's like sickness or like quarantine, like isolation, whether it's grief and loss or divorce or death or like any of that stuff. This happens. It happens to us. It happens to our children. And I think one of the things, and as a therapist, a clinician, we don't talk about resilience enough. And I think what I'm going to hope to accomplish tonight is that resilience is a really good preventative measure that we can take for our kids and for ourselves, which I will say a lot of this can be translated to you as well. But resilience is huge when it comes to preventative mental health, and it's not talked about enough, whether it's the state of our healthcare or how the system works. I think it's also, in my opinion, a lack of research, right? Because we haven't done a ton of research on resilience, which you'll see in my presentation. There are really no good longitudinal studies on resilience. And so it's this like question in a lot of clinicians' minds. It's like, how are some people or some kids more resilient than others? What, where does that come from? And how do we replicate that, right? How do we get more resilience for more kids? So anyway, great quote, great feedback from you guys. Anybody else before we move on want to say something about that or share All right. Let's keep going. So the objectives for tonight are as listed. These will be on the flyer. Every course after this will have all of our objectives on the flyer. I really try to stick to these core points in the presentation, but you'll also see I really like to have conversations with you guys. I really love when you parents ask for, you know, specific help or give me a specific situation that you need help with, because I think that helps the other people in this group learn. I think that you guys are each other's best resource. I am an expert. I do specialize in this. But I honestly think you parents are going to be the ones that are going to help each other the most. So feedback is good. I love when you guys just kind of talk to each other and throw stuff in the chat, and we'll get to each of these. So how to kind of recognize stress and respond to stress with your kids, learn a little bit about resilience in the brain and kind of like what we know. We're going to explore a little bit like how to help them sit with stress and uncertainty, or how to kind of manage this, right? Ways to improve and support resilience in your student. And then of course, the bonus, which is always tips to balance your own self-care and resiliency, because we can't pour from an empty cup. And that's my favorite saying when I work with parents. It's like the whole put on your own oxygen mask first, right? That's hard for a lot of us, because like as soon as we have kids, it's like they're the priority, right? But yeah, in all my years working with parents and all my years working with kids, I will say something that one of my mentors, who's a psychiatrist at Rady Children's, his name is Dr. Connor. He was like, when parents like feel better and get better, 90% of the time their kids get better. So it was kind of his way of saying, protect and support and help the parents, right? Do therapy with the parents. You're not just doing therapy with the kids, you're doing therapy with the parents. Because that is, you'll see over the course of these 10 classes that we do, I'm gonna like foot stomp on you guys to take care of yourselves in the best way that you can, in the best way that you are able. And hopefully I can be that person like whispering in your ear, like, hey, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. So yeah, let's move on. One of the other things that I did not put on here, and I listed on some later classes, is that you guys being able to network with other parents, right? There's how many of you guys in here? Is there like 50 of you guys? Whoa, 76. I think that's the most we've ever had. Way cool. So yeah, there's like, 75 of you in here that can support each other, right? If you want to throw in the chat like where you're at or where your kid goes, or hey, I need support for this, like get engaged with each other, because another part of this is you getting support. As a therapist, that's another big thing, is like support network, right? Like who do you have in your corner to talk to be a soundboard, to have some sort of like healthy parental relationship with, where you guys can bounce ideas and techniques and strategies that you're learning off of each other. That's always one of my biggest objectives, is like getting you guys connected. This would be great if we were in person, but we're not. So we're doing what we can with what we have. And I think Zoom's really convenient for a lot of people. All right, so now is going to be the time where I do this in most of my presentations too, where I ask you guys questions in the beginning to kind of get a dialogue going and give me some idea of what you guys need or how I can best help. So my question tonight for all of you, depending on who wants to be vulnerable or brave and give some feedback. How does stress show up for your child or your teen? And then we'll kind of get into how do you respond to that, whether at your best, at your worst. Any feedback is helpful, and I'll go into the chat for that as well. Yay, there's already people throwing in the chat like who they are and where their kids go. Okay, so Mary says, my boys usually tell me when they're stressed, and she tells them to take deep breaths. School is a big stress. Absolutely. I think if we look at data, school is probably the biggest stressor for kids, maybe secondarily to relationships, right? Like other kids or stuff like that. So yeah, definitely. Chooses nails. So one 8-year-old chooses nails and when he's stressed and he's agitated. Stephanie says, my kid doesn't tell me when he's stressed, but he's super bored with it. Okay. Liz says her daughter feels nauseous, unwell. She tries to justify her feelings, get her to understand that she's feeling emotions. And that's why she's feeling sick. Okay, war in our country, living in a new country. Totally. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of things, I think, maybe politically charged that maybe I'm not ready for yet as a therapist, but yeah, those types of things, war and tragedy, suffering. Stephanie says, I think he needs a more challenging environment. Julie says, my son needs to hear positive affirmations to get through the stress. Okay. Navigating friendships causes anxiety. Totally. At that age, well, depending on what age your daughter or son is into, yeah, that would make a big difference. But totally, relationships. I hear a lot of this. You guys saying like school is a huge stressor, relationships are stressing your kids out. Some of your kids sounds like they know how to kind of get through the stress. Some of them need your assistance. Yeah. Some of this stress is showing up as physical or somatic concerns. Totally. Anybody else? How does stress show up for your child or teen? And then I think more importantly, as a parent, how do you respond? Oh, someone says my son likes to argue when he's stressed. Siblings not getting along, behavior. Okay, stress about grades. Mary says she responds by going for walks or a bike ride. Sherry says sulking. Oh, so we've definitely got some like GI. She says my son vomits. Some kids are chewing their nails, getting tummy aches, throwing up, getting nauseous. Totally. Now, how do you guys respond when your kids are stressed? Like as parents? Tears? That, yeah. It's kind of funny. I have two little ones. And every time if they're both crying at once, I'm kind of like, oh, all it takes is like I just need to cry now. And then maybe my husband will start crying too, and we'll just all cry together. And I mean, you think I'm joking, but not really. Yeah, cry, totally. And I'm not sure, are you guys saying that your kids cry or that you cry with them or for them? Frustration if they won't talk, yep, or you can't help. Totally. Try not to engage in the arguing. I'll tell you, Stephanie, that's the best advice. It's like, do not engage in the power struggles. Don't engage in the arguing, even though I know it's really tough because it's really triggering for a lot of us. Oh, Liz says, I used to cry with my babies when they were both crying. Totally. Yeah. I'm there some days. Or just like internal screaming, Again, I think, I'm laughing, but I'm not joking. Sue says, try to listen, validate, ask how I can support. She says it's hard to extract info. We're going to get to this, and great feedback, Sue. I think that you probably have there's a lot of parents that have this shared experience, especially with teenagers. My best advice for that is like, be a piece of furniture. Like just be there with them, whatever it is they like to do, whether they're gaming or they're walking or running or they're doing like just kind of like being around is really valuable. And although you're not going to get a ton of feedback, but it is great, perfect support. Julie says, I'm patient, try to give advice. And then she says, but after a long period, I get irritated. Totally. Doesn't want to talk. Oh, it makes me so mad. Kids cry, sometimes kick, pound fists. Mary says she thanks them for telling her that she's stressed. Oh, you guys are giving me such great feedback. I love it. Liz says she gets anxious and triggered when her daughter's upset. Definitely sympathizing. Doesn't want to hear me. So what I am hearing from you guys as a collective, I'm going to kind of try to summarize this a little bit. I hear a lot of you saying that your kids maybe necessarily aren't handling frustration in the best way. Some of them, sometimes, like we all do. And you also sometimes feel frustrated as a parent, or almost always feel frustrated as a parent, because we don't know how to respond, or it's like something really stupid or trivial that they're getting upset about, or their reaction is really bizarre or escalated, or it triggers us. And so as a therapist, and I will remind myself that this is not necessarily a therapy group, this is more of like a skills kind of focus group. Doing a therapy group with 75 of you would be like totally impossible, but not that I wouldn't try or wouldn't like it, but yeah. So the reality is that, we need to look at what's triggering us. Why is their behavior triggering us? And I can kind of go into detail in that at another portion, but the reality is we get triggered by our kids' responses. And so at my best, I'm calm, I'm collected, I'm supportive, but I give limits or boundaries, right, for my little ones. At my worst, I'm snappy, maybe mean or distant. At my worst, maybe I do think I do a good job. I don't yell at my kids. I don't find myself yelling at all. I kind of do the opposite, which is like that really brooding negative silence. So that's kind of how I respond at my worst. Just kind of like invalidating, cold. That's me at my worst. So thinking about this and being honest about this is really going to help you in your parenting journey, which I assume is why all of you guys are here, to learn and to get parenting skills, or at least like try to understand your kids a little bit better, or get some tools and strategies to help you. And so that's why I asked this question, and why I try to get you guys to look at this. How do you respond when your child is stressed? And I will say, as it relates to resilience, the way we respond to our children in times of stress is directly correlated with their outcomes, right? How well they can handle stress, how resilient they are. And so you'll see this, the relationship to primary caregivers, or the relationship to safe, healthy adults in their life, is one of the biggest components or protective factors of resilience. At least that's what we think. So I'm going to encourage you guys to check into that and do your best. Nobody's perfect. This is hard. And yet here you guys all are learning and sharing and doing this thing. So great feedback. I'm so excited that so many of you guys shared. I got a couple more. I always let him talk to me. I hear what he has to say. I can trigger him though if I'm not empathetic. I try to just gently lead him, but not always successful. Stephanie, it sounds like you're doing, and Josh, I don't know which one it is of you, but you guys are doing great. This is like really therapy driven. It sounds like you're doing everything that you can. And okay, it's Stephanie. And that's awesome. And so keep doing that. And you can only do what you can do. And you're modeling to your child, right, how to do this. So Ava says, I just leave them alone, which is also probably good, depending on the situation. Oh yeah. I think a lot of us feel like failures as parents. That's that's what we're driven by sometimes, is like that fear of not being a good parent, and the fear of what could happen to my child if I let this thing happen or if this thing happens. So as parents, we have a lot of, I hear it from so many parents, and I can relate to that as well. Feeling like you haven't succeeded or that you're not a good parent. And I would argue the now like 90 of you that are here, you've shown up, you've made an effort, and that to me means everything. You're trying. And so yeah, again, you can only do what you can do. And you're here. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about resilience in the brain. What is resilience? Hugs are good too. Oh, we need hugs. And I think we don't get enough of them. So if your kids will let you, hug them all the time. Hug your spouse, hug your partners, hug your friends, whoever you can hug. We need it. And I say that, you know, there's data to support that. You guys remember like the kangaroo baby movement in the hospitals with babies in the NICU and how hugging and touching was so good. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have heard those quotes where it's like, we need like 9 hugs a day to maintain. We need 20 hugs a day to improve. We need, you know, we're physical creatures. So yeah, hug, hug, hug. I wish I could give out hugs, like one of those weird people on like YouTube or something, you know, they like go around just hugging random people. Okay. So resilience, we've already kind of addressed it a little bit. It's essentially from a psychological viewpoint, it's the ability to bounce back. It's the ability to gain your footing again and again, anytime we face an obstacle, right? We also have this kind of biological viewpoint, which is, there's like blood changes that happen, right? There's a biological component to this. And when we are more resilient, we are able to produce more protector cells. And so in a very like shaved down conversation, the reality is the more emotionally adept we are at bouncing back when tragedy strikes or something happens, something bad happens in our life, we can be emotionally prepared and biologically prepared. And so a lot of what we don't recognize, or a lot of people don't recognize, is that there's this mind-body connection. And so there's so much coming out in maybe kind of more social media driven spaces in the psychiatry and psychology realms that are bringing this to light. So what we want to remember is that resilience is not an equivalent of shutting down our emotions, numbing ourselves, burying emotion, right? Distancing ourselves from reactions for fear of what will happen if we feel it, right? What resilience does is it's teaching our children and giving them this inherent quality of being able to feel and experience their emotion without becoming totally overwhelmed, right? We've seen, I'm sure you've experienced this yourselves, you've seen your kids experience it, when we call it kind of flipping your lid, right? You have an emotion, it feels like that emotion is skyrockets, right? It's a 10 out of 10. We kind of see red, we can't calm it down, we can't turn it off, right? And so that experience can be really scary, right? That experience is like, I'm not in control. And so we don't want either one of those drastic sides of the equilibrium. We want them to feel and experience their emotion and then be able to move forward, right? So we're kind of in this space of not ignoring it, not letting it rule us, and kind of somewhere in the middle. Arthur, it looks like, raised his hand. I don't know if you meant to do that. Did you want to say something? Go ahead. Sometimes that happens on accident, but.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So I just want to like understand that concept. So
Sure.
bouncing back is imagining that you have a hard ground, right? So it seems like in this type of emotional and all that stuff that you're talking about, it may not have a ground.
And I'm not sure, it may not have a what?
So bouncing back means you go all the way to the bottom and come back, right? Is it what you mean? Or you're bouncing back like your lowest point?
So that's a good, thank you for that feedback. That's not necessarily what I mean, is that because I think some people, they may go all the way to the bottom. They may get, to that worst point or feel the worst or experience the worst. I think but not everybody has to experience it that way, right? Like their emotions may not dip them that low, but with the metaphor kind of bouncing back is just like if you feel some really intense emotion or you experience grief or loss, the ability to just kind of like pick yourself up back up again, and it doesn't like destroy you, right? It doesn't plummet you to your lowest and then keep you there. Does that
Oh,
kind of
so it's maybe more like a turning point
sure. Yeah.
instead of a bouncing point. Like that way in that stage where you're able to break away from what you currently feel, and you start to see those emotions that are more on the positive side, and then able to work on those rather than you know looking for the ground to make it all the way to the bottom.
Right. Yeah, no, we don't want anybody to go to the very bottom unless they have to, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, if it's easier for you to kind of like think of it in that way as like a turning point rather than bouncing back. Of course, I don't think that metaphor works for everybody or but I'm glad that you brought that up, and totally. My hope is that it helps you kind of understand it doesn't necessarily have to mean you're dipping down to your lowest point and then coming back. It just means that when you do experience some sort of suffering or tragedy, you're able to kind of feel that emotion and then process and work through it, right? Instead of like plummeting and then it just like everything, I'm done, right? Like that's kind of what I mean by that. Does that make more sense?
Yes,
Hi.
thank you.
Cool.
Hi, can I say something?
Really?
I think it's just as simple as bouncing back from something like I got tagged in a game and I got out. And is that something I cry over? Right. I'm talking about younger kids now, because I feel like there has been an effect in COVID and that social ability to just be resilient and to bounce back from small setbacks.
Totally. Yeah, thank you very much. Is it Carrie? I hope I'm saying that right.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally. So it's exactly those things. It can be big things, but it also can be very small things. We want our kids to not be so affected by those small things, right? And of course, we see them as small, but our children in those moments may not. Obviously, I deal with this all the time because I have a toddler where it's like the end of the world if we use the wrong cup color or whatever it is, right? So totally, you want to build your child's exposure and ability to bounce back from even those tiny things, from big things. And yeah, I mean, if we think about it as like from an exposure standpoint, getting them used to those small things, what again we interpret as small, we're setting them up for those big things, right? For the exposure and the learning and their brain development to go, oh, okay, like I've handled this before. I've handled these like 2, 3 on the scale of 1 to 10. So definitely, yeah, great feedback, Carrie. Thank you. Teresa says, I use my moods as examples for my kids and they realize it's okay. We all have emotions. We just need to recognize and adjust. Yeah, I'll say that again and again. Those of you that attend more of these classes, I really repeat almost to the point of ad nauseum that like you model to your kids don't do what you tell them to, they do what they see you do, right? So modeling, showing them like I have a hard time with this modeling to your kids that like something makes you sad or something makes you mad, giving them that exposure, modeling to them how you do it, how you come back from small things. You spill your coffee all over yourself in the car in the morning and you're like, wanting to just freak out or curse or whatever. Showing them that you're angry, that you're frustrated, like that's all really good exposure. And then teaching them the proper way to handle it. Totally. It's funny, I had a conversation with my husband really recently about this because he tends to really struggle with his anger. And I'm like, stop pushing it down. You got to show her, right? Like show her that you get mad too. It's okay. So he gets all the benefits of having a therapist, but he doesn't have to pay for it. So that's pretty cool. Liz says, I've had many occasions of getting upset and angry. I've modeled deep breathing, meeting my pointer fingers with my thumbs, yoga style. Sometimes I see my younger daughter do the same. Oh, that's great. Yep. I'll say it again and again. They are going to do what they see you do. So if you yell, they yell. If you throw things, they throw things. It's science, it's mirror neurons. We could get into that and dive into that deep hole, but I'm just here to tell you guys that's the way it is. So there's a way to come back from that though. If you yell and your kids yell, we're going to stop yelling, right? We're going to find different ways to do it. And I'm going to teach you guys some of those skills and, you know, ways to repair that stuff with our kids and all that. Okay. So essentially we kind of understand what, oh, somebody raised their hand. Dorothy, go ahead.
Thank you so much for letting me talk. I have a question for you. What if one parent models that they're in control and they react very well to stress, and the other one can't handle stress and is having a hard time with dealing with it? How do you help children to become resilient?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you, this is really tough, Dorothy. Thank you so much for asking that question. But I will say right out the gate, this is a really tough question. It's not a tough question to answer. It's a tough answer because what happens when you have two parents that in my mind are kind of not on the same page, right? Like, and this is not abnormal, right? We fall in love and marry someone and we have kids with them, and like, you know, both of us sometimes fluctuate, especially depending on what's happening in our lives, right? So I think the best thing is like helping your partner deal with the things that's bothering them, whether that's by like, hey, like maybe talking to somebody might help, or like who can support you, or like how can I support you, or like tagging out, right? I always recommend that if you've got a parent who like, okay, I'm triggered, or they find that they get triggered over certain things more, it's like tap out with each other, right? That's a really good and helpful dual parenting trick. Is
What
just,
what if you do not live together, you separated?
yeah, so that's even tougher. Is that when you have two parents, and this I get into, I have a course that we'll teach towards the end, and it's dealing with divorce and co-parenting, because that's essentially what you're talking about, right? Is maybe I'm generalizing here, but essentially co-parenting, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I didn't want to assume anything, and I apologize for that. I just
Oh, no worries.
kind of generalizing here, but the reality is co-parenting is one of the thing that parents actually have talked about the most in my classes, of like, hey, give me tips, give me things to try, give me things. And the best thing that I can tell you is you have to do within what's in your control, right? Because you're not going to be able to change this other parent or how they respond.
Right.
Eventually, depending on the age of your children, you can kind of talk to them without directing it at the parent, right? Because we don't want to do that either. But like, hey, have you ever seen, you know, when people can't handle their anger, like what does that look like? And like, how can we do it? How do we do it? Right. And like, of course, modeling to them always. But I think eventually that's going to be a conversation that you have with them, because you're not going to be able to fix this. I think if it's really important to you and you have someone who's maybe a little bit receptive, try talking to them about it. Try saying it in this very diffused, and if you come to the talk on co-parenting, we'll talk about techniques and like how to talk to people in a certain way, right? That's not, you do this. It could be something like, hey, I feel like sometimes the way that we react to our emotions, we are teaching our son or daughter, like, maybe that's not the best way. Like, what do you think? How could we fix this? Right. And not this is not an attack on them. It's not like a, hey, you're doing this. It could be like a, maybe even just, hey, we're both kind of doing this thing. Like I noticed, and like, how could we fix this? Like, what do you think? And sometimes that's kind of the best way to do it. If you don't have someone that's receptive at all, and I get into this with, maybe toxic co-parenting or people who are not receptive at all, that's a whole nother ball game. And I always recommend seeking either a specialist, somebody to help you kind of navigate that, because that's going to be really, really difficult. And that's kind of another technique altogether of parenting. Does that kind of help a little bit?
Yeah, I'm wondering about the last thing that you said. How can, someone, yeah. Yeah, basically the last thing would apply, I think. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I'm sorry that is happening, and it does happen, and it's I will say, in these conversations that I have, in the virtual parent academy, it's one of the hardest things, because I don't have a lot of good advice in these talks for maybe toxic co-parents or distant co-parents, because again, that's kind of a whole thing altogether. And I know a lot of you might experience that, because like I said, I have got a lot of feedback, which led me to do the talk in general. It led me to do that in the first place, the co-parenting and divorce talk, because we were getting so many questions about like, how do I do this if my partner, we're divorced, or like they do something completely different. And so, that's a really tough one. And I will say, that gives me some more, feedback, and maybe I do another course about it, or maybe even one about kind of the toxic or the distant parenting, and how to kind of delve into that. I will say, to end that, Dorothy, or to close that question for you, there are specialists that therapy specialists that specialize essentially in what you're talking about, and kind of working with either parent or both parents or one parent to manage that, because it's really, really tough.
Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Dorothy. Thanks for the question. I hope at least some of that helped in some way.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Okay, Stephanie says, I'm not sure I always know how to behave once I'm upset. So that's another one that has been highly requested, which is how do I cope with my own emotions? I got a lot of feedback for that, and I have not added that one yet, but I see that one coming down the pipeline. Let's see. Let's work with our partner to be on the same page. If it doesn't work, do your best. Great advice. They'll say, great advice. Okay, Ani threw in there the topic, or the class on divorce and co-parenting, is on March 6th. So everybody that wants to attend, be there.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about resilience in the brain without getting too in the weeds or too scientific about it. For a long time, and when I say we, I mean the scientific community, when it comes to psychology and psychiatry, had this view that there were possibly genetic components to resilience, and obviously environmental components. And so this is also the nature nurture thing. I'm sure you guys have heard about that. And the reality is we just are not completely sure, right? I told you that the research is lacking. And the reality is that when we view the brain, we do see some activity in the prefrontal cortex that seems promising in the avenue when we talk about resilience. And this just means that there might be some genetic component to this. So you might have a parent who's been super resilient in life, and genetically or hereditarily they pass that on, and their child's more resilient. Now, alternatively, we talk about things like failed plasticity, or changes in the brain due to environmental components, and those things can happen, right? We know that developmentally things changes in utero and in the womb, those things are all impacting our kids, and they certainly impact development, when we look at the environment and the parenting strategies and things like that from 0 to 5 years old. So we know that that plays a part. What we also know is that the approach to gaining resilience or improving resilience in our kids is not one size fits all, right? It's not like a standard, do this and your child will be resilient, right? Now, we certainly have ideas about what helps. I did tell you guys at the beginning, and I'll say this again, the relationship that they have to their primary caregivers and close adults, right? Whether it's like a grandparent or a coach or a mentor, those really close and safe, healthy relationships do wonders for resilience from a young age and continuously. So these things are kind of, they're compounding as well. So that means you got a good relationship with them as they were kids, and this benefit compounds as they age. One of the things that we know affects resiliency almost kind of hands down is trauma, right? And we talk about some of the big T trauma, and we won't go deep into this, but I'm sure a lot of you guys know the kind of like physical, sexual, emotional abuse. Those things are huge when it comes to brain development and even brain structure. And when we talk about that prefrontal cortex, this is also something that develops as kids age. So this is not something that's like they're babies and they're born with it, right? It's like it develops over time. It develops with their relationships. It develops as they age. And so what we've looked at is there's some Harvard Medical School studies. They found that the structure of a resilient brain doesn't look much different, right? There are some differences, but it doesn't look much different than vulnerable ones. And so they found that there was remarkably similar neural network architecture, and which is kind of good news, right? This means that these things can be isolated. If there is trauma in your child's life, it's not like, okay, their resilience is trashed, like they're not going to have good resilience. It's not, it doesn't mean that at all. The great thing about this is that it showed that some changes in the brain, they were isolated in emotional reactions. And so what we find is the amygdala is the region strongly linked to fear and learning. And the reality is that these small changes, they don't make a huge difference. And so that's kind of what this study out of Harvard came up with. And unfortunately, like I said, the evidence on all of this is pretty slim, or the research, I should say. It's not a very in-depth area of research. My hope is that now that COVID happened, I think there's a lot of different universities that are looking into resilience. How do we use this preventative measure when we deal with large, social pandemics or war, or really kind of like large scale I totally lost the word for it, natural disasters, right? Big, like those big things. So they're really looking at resilience more. So what we talked, one of the other findings was that animals exposed to severe stress, it resulted in depression-like behavior in humans. However, a third of mice showed natural resilience behaviors to the stress. So one of the cool things is that they are seeming to link this to this like inherent quality that we have in order with animals to resist stress, right? And to what degree, we're not totally sure, but the reality is that animals show this ability to do this. So this is kind of repeated, the first 2 points, not sure what happened there. And so now, if anybody has any questions, we can address questions, but how are we doing on time? It's almost 6. And I think we're making pretty good time. I'm gonna check the chat. Anybody have any questions before we move on? I know that kind of the research is a little bit brief and we kind of jumped in and jumped out of there. Again, I think the gist of this conversation in terms of the scientific research is that we need more. and better ways to understand how we can promote resilience in our kids, especially if there's trauma and things like that happen. Raquel, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to, I don't know if you said it, but I'm not completely sure if I understand. So does that mean that everybody has the same ability to develop resiliency regardless of our brains? It is mainly more in terms of trauma or other things that affect the way that we can cope with stressors.
Yeah, so Raquel, that's a good question. So the evidence that I've reviewed leads me to believe that not everybody has the same ability, right, to either be resilient or not, because I think from the research that there's some genetic or hereditary component. We don't know how much, right? Like because I can imagine maybe anecdotally looking at some kids maybe that I've seen in the past, maybe their parents didn't have the most ability to be resilient, and yet they were super resilient, right? So it's like, well, I guess that wouldn't make sense if we're looking at genetics, right? Like that doesn't correlate. But I also think that kids that had super resilient parents, there would be some kids that just like, how did this happen, right? Like, and of course, I'm speaking anecdotally because I know we can probably say that we've seen both of those examples, maybe in our own personal lives. I've certainly seen it in my experience working with kids and families. But I think the important part of all of that is that the brain structure is not hugely changed by like looking at a resilient child's brain versus a not resilient child's brain. The structural differences are not huge. And so what that means is, that's a good thing, right? It means that like, okay, so it doesn't mean that there's this huge difference that would like deplete their ability or serve as a barrier to those kids being able to be resilient. I think what it means is like, okay, maybe they're like, you know, they don't have the best, they don't have the best ability to be resilient, but we can teach this, we can improve this by doing certain things, by some preventative measures, especially during 0 to 5 years old. So I hope that answers your question. I don't think that it means that we're all kind of on the same playing field. I think it means that there are genetic component differences. There are things that happen environmentally, right? Different trauma, tragedy, whether it's biological or physiological, those things can definitely make a difference. But what I am saying is that we can improve it. We can help kids who maybe aren't so resilient or maybe don't have some like cool genetic, you know, profile that helps, and we can help them improve it kind of environmentally, right? By giving them different skills, by parenting differently. And yeah, I think we can do that. Thank you for the question, Raquel. Yeah, I hope that answers it. And one other really cool thing, when I was working at Rady Children's, there's a program called the Chadwick program, and it's specifically for trauma. And so I didn't work for Chadwick, but we were like linked, right? We had a couple therapists that were down there. And so we did some conferences about trauma. And one of the things that they found when they look at exposure to trauma is the response from the primary caregiver during that trauma, right? So how supportive the parent or the caregiver was during the time of that trauma is very correlated with the outcome. So how well the child handles it, right? So to me, that makes me think if a child who doesn't really have great resilience, maybe they're, you know, genetically they don't have great resilience, or maybe environmentally they didn't, if their parent is very supportive and, you know, giving them resources that they need, being there for them, being gentle, right, doing all of those good parenting things that we know and that we'll talk about, their incomes were way better, right? Like it improved outcomes in a massive way, which I think is so cool, because if we think about that, we can say like, none of that matters. Like, me as their parent, how supportive I am, how engaged I am with them, how like I model control and like emotional coping to them, that's huge, right? Because that's like within our grasp. That's something we can change. And so there is data to support that. And when I learned that about trauma, I was like, this is cool. I can talk to every parent. I can make every parent be good at responding to their child if trauma happens. And while that's incredibly hard for a parent to handle, we can do it, right? We can be a supportive person for them. We can be there for them. We can help them model a good way to cope and all that good stuff. So I thought that was pretty amazing, and also really great data to back it up. So thanks, Raquel, for that question. Liz says, I think it's always challenging to try to figure out when and how to actually allow our kids to experience difficulties and mild traumas. Our generation's quick to protect our children from difficulties. I've learned it's more important to allow kids to experience hardships and hurdles. Clinical psychologist Wendy Mogul, blessing of a skin knee, the blessing of a B-. What are your thoughts? I think it's important to find the right balance between supporting and not solving challenges for problems for our kids. So great feedback, Liz. And I pretty much agree wholeheartedly. I heard something recently where it said, do not prepare the path for your child, prepare your child for the path, right? And that's that exact thing. Is we don't want to be, there is this kind of problem with coddling or not allowing our children to experience hardship or suffering. I think it's going to be huge. I think if it's not already kind of coming out with our kids, I think it's going to, because I can raise my own hand and criticize my own self, because I do tend to be a little bit of a helicopter parent, especially with my girls. I'm like, I don't want them to get hurt. I don't want them to cry. I don't want them to experience anything that's bad or negative, right? And I'm even maybe to a different degree, because I'm a therapist and I see all this stuff. But yeah, we shouldn't. We're setting our kids up for failure if we do that, essentially. So great feedback, Liz. I think that we absolutely need to let our kids experience life while being super supportive, super safe, right? People that they can go to always. I have not read those books, and I'm going to keep track of that and put them in my Amazon cart so I can check those out. There is some research coming out, and I'm going to share a lot of that in my future classes about, there's one called, I'm not saying it exactly correct. It's on my list to buy, but it's like The Dangers of Coddling the American Mind or something like that. And it's basically this idea that like we are creating this like bubble around our kids in some ways, and it's not helpful. It's basically kind of handicapping them, right? When I used to work at Rady and I did work with parents, I always told parents, do not do for your child what they can do for themselves, right? And that's not across the board. Don't get me wrong. Like, okay, if your child is young and they can tie their shoes, but that's not what I'm saying, right? This is not like a across the board statement. But the reality is, if your child can do something, you know they can do it, and you're doing it for them as a convenience maybe to you, look at that, because we're actually handicapping them if we're doing it in that way. And so, yeah, and we're not preparing them for life. So I would agree with that comment. And I would say there's a balance to that, right? We're not going to just like leave them high and dry, but we're certainly not going to protect them from everything, because again, then they're not prepared for the path, right? They're not going to be able to handle it. Sue says, the world's a lot more messy. My teens had to navigate more than I ever did. Social media, climate change, political instability. Totally, Sue, great point. And life is so different. And I do think, I'll get into this because I have a talk on social media and technology. And And man, I wish I could do a whole series on that, a whole 10 class series on that, because the research that's coming out about social media and the access to internet, it's troubling. I'll say as a parent, it's very troubling. As a clinician, it's troubling. As a parent, as a person, it's really kind of scary to read. So totally, Sue, they have totally different challenges than we had as kids, that the generation above us had. It is a little bit scary. And so my hope is that instead of being scared, I equip people with knowledge. And I'm probably going to say a lot of things in that talk that is not going to be very popular, but yeah, I think it's what we need. So we'll totally get to that. Social media definitely brings up some different challenges for our kids, for sure. Some of the fights because they still want to hold on being the baby. I always say I'm prepping for roommates who will not be as kind as mommy and daddy and training them to be real humans. Stephanie, totally. Yeah. It's also like, yeah, it's very comforting to have someone that does things for you, right? And our kids, one thing that I try to teach too, and again, I'm learning this myself as a parent of young kids. I try not to do everything for my kids. I try to get my daughter, like, you can put your toys away. You can put your shoes on, like you can get dressed, right? Like you can clean up your plate after you eat, even if they're 2, they're 3, because I think it's that important to kind of cultivate that at a young age, because yeah, they need to be prepared, and it's easier if you start earlier. I think the reality is that a lot of you probably don't have toddlers anymore. Maybe you do, but and some of that will be really cool, and you'll get to start that with your toddlers. But a lot of you have kids that are school age, right? That are in elementary and middle school, and so you didn't maybe necessarily start this thing when they were toddlers, and that wasn't the thing to do then. And I realized parenting comes in waves, and it comes in culture and society and tradition and people, doing things different. And so, yeah, I'm going to hopefully equip you guys with some things to start now, because you can, and it does make a difference. Ava, preparing my son, learn how to resolve his problems, but if he needs me, I'm there. It's the perfect balance, being a supportive, safe parent for that when things go wrong, you're there, you can help them get through it. That's what they need. It's really hard though. It's so hard. I have 2 girls, and it's like, oh, it just breaks your heart when they're sad or they cry or they get hurt. It's like, ugh, yeah, I don't even like thinking about it. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, you guys are so welcome. I'm so glad to get to do this. And this is a good start to our 10, it's not a 10-week course because they're every other week, but 10 course series. Stephanie says, I have a good friend who says that she's trying to create humans that she'd like to hang out with as adults. Yeah, totally. We don't want to hang out with people who, like, they go over a speed bump and they're like just dissolving right into a puddle. Like, it's so hard to be around people that can't bounce back, or as we another metaphor is like turn around, right? Or like shift yourself when you something bad goes wrong. Yeah, raise kids that you want to hang out with as adults. That's great. Is there any research around resiliency being higher in boys versus girls, or vice versa around toddler age? Alejandro, that's a good question. I can't say that I know the answer to that off the top of my head. My gut inclination is that if they were to pull data, it might look like boys are a little bit more resilient than girls. And I would argue that there's some other reasons for that, right? Like parental and cultural differences in how we react to boys versus girls when something goes wrong, or yeah, so that's super interesting. What I'll do, Alejandro, is I'll think of that, and maybe next time I can share if I find any articles on that. But off the top of my head, no, I can't think of any like actual data that says that, but it wouldn't surprise me anecdotally if boys were a little bit more resilient than girls, at least initially. So yeah, you're very welcome. I'll check it out. I geek out on this stuff anyways, so I'll look it up and see what we find. Okay, so let's kind of get into, I look at maybe the upswing of all of this, which is, how do we support our kids? How can you support your student or your child? And how can you promote resiliency? Like we talked about, the number one thing to me, this is backed by what research we have, and this is also a thread that I carry through all of my courses, all of my parenting help. The main thread is your relationship with your child. And so personally, I think in your parenting journey, if I could give you one thing to work on and a couple strategies to do that, which I will, is work on the relationship that you have. Is it a mutually respective relationship? Do you guys respect each other? You know, are you a safe person for your kid? Do you, are you able to kind of manage your emotions and be that person that's, I call it a solid object? Are you able to be that like rock that your kid can come to? They know how you're going to react. You're not going to like blow your lid or just completely go into rage mode or get angry at them. Like, can they bounce things off of you, right? Like, do you have that, like I said, kind of calm, supportive relationship with your child? And I'm going to ask you guys kind of all these questions and just kind of think about it. And if you don't, coming to these classes and getting some of these tips on how to talk to your kids, how to understand your kids, how to deal with, all the different topics that we talk about. If you could only focus on one thing, focus on your relationship with your kids. Because the data shows it, and anecdotally, if your kids have a good relationship with you, the mental health outcomes for them are better. And so like I couldn't state it any simpler. And if you need help with the relationship, I know a lot of parents, especially with teens, when I used to do these courses, I used to do them in person at Twin Oaks, and I'd have parents that were like, my teenagers don't listen to me. They don't respect me. They don't like me. They don't want to be around me. Right. And like, that's kind of what I visualize as a really, really tough thing as a parent, because it's like, I don't have a relationship with them anymore. Right. And then that's the foundation of your parenting in my view. If you don't have a good relationship with them, if they don't respect you, if they don't feel safe with you, if they can't talk to you, if they're scared of you or whatever, right? Nothing else that I give you is going to work, right? Because it's kind of like the foundation that's crumbled and we have to rebuild that. And that's going to be things like apologizing, right? Apologizing for things that maybe you've done that you regret, or that that they didn't like. Hey, what can I do? I'm taking this parenting course, and like, if you could give me a list of everything that I do wrong as a parent, like, can you write it out for me? Like, I want to know, right? Like, you're coming from a place of, I need to repair, right? I'm sorry that I've messed up. I've done XYZ. Like, how can I fix it? What do you think? Right. And so I know with teenagers, that's a little bit easier to do, because they're going to give you a long list of like what you're doing wrong and how to fix it. Maybe just the what you're doing wrong part. But yeah, I mean, I think that's where you need to start. If you have a really kind of volatile relationship with your kids, like, and you're like, gosh, I can't fix the relationship, I would say even like family therapy, like reach out to an expert, talk to somebody, get a mentor, somebody to like, maybe even like family member that they trust, like get some sort of fix started with that, because that is going to be huge, just in your parenting journey and your relationship with your kids, but also in this avenue of like promoting and improving resiliency with your kids, which ultimately is going to be helpful for them when they age, right? Resiliency is pretty correlated to mental health problems. If they have low resiliency, they tend to have high mental health issues. And then we can say, the opposite, right? They've got really good resilience. They tend to have very low mental health issues or psychological issues, diagnoses, whatever we want to say. So resiliency is super important to like the health of our kids, especially as they age. Okay, so some more ways to support and improve that relationship would be active listening, right? Like, do you know how to active listen, right? Are you undistracted when your kids are talking? Are you paying full attention? I know we all have this issue, at least I'm going to say and admit that I do. I am on my phone way too much. I'm on my phone at home. I'm on my phone at work. I'm on it too much, right? And it's a problem. And I'll get to that in the social media and tech conversation, but like, are you distracted, right? I know there's a lot going around where it's basically like, if someone's talking to you and you pick your phone up while they're talking, it's like they're not even there, right? And so our kids, even as young as they are, they feel this and they see this and they see like, oh, that thing's more important than me, right? Mom's not talking to me. She's not even looking at me. I'm just, they're just giving out bids to play and mom's not getting it because she's on her phone, right? And so active listening, checking in with your kids, supervising your kids, being really present. Like I said, the phone is a big issue for me. I'm going to try to do this whole New Year thing where I really focus on using my phone way less because all the research that I'm seeing is like, this is toxic. The phone is toxic. And so not in like an extreme way. I think phones are definitely have good use, and I want to be able to teach my kids to use them as tools, and I want to use them myself as a tool, but I don't want to like scroll on the social media, right? Like it's a problem. They designed it that way. And I want to be present, right? Active listening, checking in with your kids. Hey, how was your day? Like actually listening, looking at them in the eye, right? Being present. Supervision is a big one for me. I just think as a therapist, I always tell parents, like, what's your level of supervision? Up it, right? And we can kind of get into more detail about what that looks like in terms of technology and other types of things as well. But it's a good way to promote resiliency by being present with your kids. One of the biggest things is obviously modeling the appropriate emotional regulation, helping our kids. And so this is like they see us do it, and then we teach them how to do it, right? Huge responsibility for all of us to have to do it for ourselves because it's very hard, and then also teach little ones or just young ones how to do it. And essentially, if you don't know how to do it and you're like, I don't even know how to manage my own emotions, there's ways you can get better at this, right? There's ways that you can learn how to cope. There's obviously specialists that can help you do this. If your insurance covers therapy, check that out. If you can go online, find some therapy or like self-help books, you can just kind of order a book. I know that therapy is not accessible to everyone, but yeah, it's essentially like we have to learn how to cope ourselves before helping our kids, right? Because we're modeling that to them. And I think it's incredibly important to learn how to do that. Like I said, I've had a conversation with my husband very recently on how to help him cope with his anger, right? And how to show my daughter that it's okay to be angry and that he does get angry and like how to deal with it. Of course, he's got me to kind of help him figure that out, which is, I told him, just like, tell her say the words, I am so angry right now. I'm so mad right now, right? Say it. So just say the words. And if that's the one skill of like helping you to identify your feelings and to help like model, you're just going to say it as you're feeling it, right? I'm so mad right now. And like, I got to go outside. Sometimes that's the best, is like escape, right? Maybe you can't be around your kids right now. Maybe you can't be around other people right now because you're so mad, you're so sad, you're so frustrated. Saying it, right? Just that verbalization of our feeling and just identifying it is going to be huge with kids. And then you're just modeling that, like, okay, I need to go into my timeout and I need to go take 10 deep breaths, and you leave. Or it's shorter than that. I gotta go take a break, right? Whatever that looks like, however that sounds, you develop something while you're calm with your kids, right? This is what mom's gonna do when she's flipped her lid. This is what you can do, right? So this does not come to any of us naturally. This is not, you know, I'm only decent at this because I'm a therapist. So yeah, this is going to be how we help support resilience in our kids. Teaching, practicing mindfulness or relaxation exercises. So I would recommend finding a book. If you have really little kids, in terms of relaxation and mindfulness, there's one called Sit Still Like a Frog. I actually have that one, and it's really good because it kind of uses those metaphors. You know, oh, like a frog can sit on the lily pad and just kind of like hang out, and he's, you know, looking around, and there's audio to go with it. And I use one with my daughter where I tell her, like, smell the birthday cake and blow out the candles, right? Sometimes when I get really mad, it helps to focus on like cake, because I just love cake, right? Doing something like that, teaching them, and I've taught her at a young age, and I see her doing it now, and reminding them, this is how you do it. Hey, maybe you need to go take some time. If they're older, right, you can kind of do that in a different way, but teaching them how to do it, because no one else is going to teach them. And if you don't know how to do it, like, learn, go on YouTube, look up progressive muscle relaxation or mindfulness meditation. Headspace is a really cool app. I've really liked that one. There is a charge to that, but I don't know if you pay for other apps. Headspace is a good one to actually like help teach you this kind of stuff, and you can do it with your kids. Development of appropriate role models. So finding people, whether it's in your family, if you don't have family close, like friends, if your kid plays a sport, right? Social network, peers, positive relationships. I do specify non-internet here, because everyone's always like, oh, like my kid, you know, he gets so much social interaction from video games, and like they play, and like that's his way, which is great. But they also need, right, some other positive relationships that are not related to gaming or to the internet. Particularly, we're talking about boys, right? So yeah, like it could be a sport that they play, it could be a friend, it could be a neighbor, it could be obviously dad or an uncle or grandpa or whoever. We're going to try to set up these relationships in our kids' lives in order to, again, improve the quality and quantity of relationships that they have with healthy adults, because that's what's going to make them much more resilient in life. And again, that's not just like a, hey, I think you should do it. It's like backed by data. So this is another one that we kind of got at when we were talking about I can't remember if it was Liz. Somebody mentioned, a parent mentioned, like allowing their child to like get hurt, or like be in a situation where something happens that they don't like, or right, like allowing them to experience suffering or whatever it is, something bad happening, in order to teach them, like, this is how you can come back from it, right? This is how you handle it. This is exposure. And so this is a good way of doing it in kind of another way, where it's like not just a natural consequence, something natural happening in their environment. It's like set goals with them and then help them meet them, right? Because this is teaching them, and it's actually working on a cognitive level in their brain, that like, I can do small things, and then I get to this, I get this reward, or I get this outcome, right? And so this is a very, you know, widespread concept when we talk about like cognitive behavioral therapy, is this behavioral activation. It's like, teach somebody to do something and help them do it, and then they learn, right? Their brain goes, oh, I can do this. Like, I've done this before. And it builds resolve, it builds resilience. And so this could be small things. It could be like helping your child get enough money to purchase something that they really want. It could be helping them learn to do a new skill. It could be you know, helping them with a goal with school. They want to raise their grade from a C to a B, or like whatever it is, whatever that your child likes or is engaged in, help them set a goal, a realistic, appropriate, you know, healthy, age appropriate goal, and then assist them in meeting that goal. And as you're doing that, right, like I said, you're actually engaging the brain on a cognitive level, and you're teaching the brain that, like, I can do this. Excuse me. Alejandro, do you have a resource to share? Would be good reading on resiliency language to use with a 6-year-old. I find myself using language that upsets her when my intention is to uplift, but I'm aware the language I use is what my parents used. Oh, okay. Well, I almost feel like I'd need to know more about what language you use with her. Good reading on resiliency language to use with a 6-year-old, because what I see that is like these ways to support your child, like it's the language specifically maybe that you're struggling with, like what seems to trick, because it might be something like as easy as what's triggering her, what is the language that she doesn't like, is it and you're noticing, you're saying like your family of origin or your parents use that language, did it upset you? I don't know, this makes me kind of think and get a little bit more into that. What is the language that she doesn't like? That would also give me maybe a little bit of context to like what you can use instead. Good reading on language. That'll be another one that I can get back to you on, Alejandro, or find some resources for you. But yeah, I'd probably have to know too what is not working with her, so I don't suggest that stuff. Okay. So this is something that I also do as kind of a standard in my presentations. I give you guys an exercise that you can take home with you, because I feel like if we were in person, we'd be doing this in person. And since we're not, I give you guys more information and then get you to take the exercise home, because it's kind of impossible to do this when we're not in person. But what we have is a worksheet on how to, what we call flip your thought. So it's a cognitive strategy that we use in therapy, right? And it's basically what we would use in order to have a more flexible mindset. Okay. So my goal for this worksheet would be use it yourself, get familiar with it, like maybe do it with something that you have, like some sort of negative thought, right? Negative thinking really is kind of a hindrance. It's a barrier to resilience. I find myself, again, I'm just going to kind of be vulnerable and throw it out there. I find myself that I get very easily into a negative mindset sometimes. I know about myself. I'm very self-aware of that, probably because I'm a therapist and we do a lot of self-reflection as some of our work and become more self-aware. But the reality is negative thinking is a huge barrier. So if I can teach you guys and then ultimately teach your kids, you can teach your kids how to do this one skill of like, okay, no one likes me, right? We want to teach kids how to reframe those thoughts, because if you can have a little bit of a more positive mindset, it doesn't mean that we're like painting everything, everything's pink and perfect and roses, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to say no one likes me. Well, everyone likes me, because that's not true. And that's one of those things that your brain just cannot believe, right? But you could say, well, I like me, and I know my family likes me, and I do have that one friend that likes me, right? So we're going to kind of like flip the thought into something that's a little bit more, I wouldn't even say positive, a little bit more neutral. Okay. So this is a great exercise, like I said, to try yourself and then teach your kids. Oh, great. Somebody made a suggestion for Alejandro, The Conscious Parent, a great book that addresses some language to use. Instead of like uplifting, it seems to like upset your kids. Conscious Parent is one that is suggested. Liz says it's hard to see. Any way to zoom in? Oh, you know what I could do? Let's see if this works. Maybe if I make it this big, you guys could take some screenshots. Liz, does that work? Great. Yeah, so I'll let you guys kind of get a screenshot here, and then I'll scroll down so you can get one of the bottom part of the page. I hope that helps. Yeah, so essentially what I'm proposing here is that you do a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is flipping negative thoughts, reframing them to be a little bit more neutral. And this is also going to obviously improve things like just being sad, right? Being frustrated, having negative self-esteem. But this is something that we know also promotes resilience. That ability for kids to be like, oh, like I messed up, like I failed. And it's like a lot of kids, I think, do the like, well, what if something bad happens? Or what if I fail? What if it doesn't go well? And I'm always like, what if it goes well? What if you succeed? What if you do the right thing? What if it, what if somebody likes it? What if, because we do that a lot. We catastrophize and we think the worst. What if the worst? And I know that our kids do this a lot too. So this can give you some helpful ways to reframe some thoughts. If you're having, struggling on how to reframe your thoughts, what I would argue is like, think of it as a little bit more neutral. We don't want to go like the extreme positive end of like, everyone hates me, everyone loves me, because your brain just can't jive with that. So something a little bit more neutral, like, well, I know my best friend loves me and I know my mom loves me, right? Like there are some certain things that we can do to kind of help kids manage that negative thinking. Let's zoom back out. All right. So some of the ways that we help our kids sit with uncertainty and stress, right? We knew that, well, actually, some of you guys talked about this in the very beginning of like how stress shows up for your kids. Some of it was like somatic concerns, like, which is, the physical issues, the GI upset, stuff like that. You guys talked a lot about not knowing how to help them deal with it, especially like, oh, teenagers, they don't want to talk about it. I just leave them alone. I try to avoid it, right? Like, oh, great. Ani found it and threw it in the chat for you guys. Awesome. So yeah, some of you guys were kind of saying like you didn't know what to do. So like, here's some tips of like what to do. I said this earlier, when it comes to teenagers, be a piece of furniture, be in the room, be next to them, be with them. I would say the best way to kind of do that is like doing something that they like to do. Doesn't have to be like awkward or you're just kind of like sitting in their room, right? Like you want to like engage in something that they're interested in. It might be playing video games with them, right? Not even talking, not even looking at them, but like physically being present. I talked a little bit about this with the no phone or the screens, right? Like turning off the TV, putting our phones in a bin somewhere. Your posture, your tone of voice, like a genuine, like, I want to listen and be here, right? I'm going to look at them. I might sit down if they're sitting down. I might get down on their level if they're little, right? Get down on the floor with them. This is a huge thing because, your kids can tell, they spot, being disingenuous from a mile away. I've worked with teenagers for so many years that it's the same thing. Like they can spot it. They know when you're not being genuine. They know when you're distracted. And so just simply being physically present is super, super helpful when it comes to helping support them through their stress. And you might go, well, I'm not even like doing anything. They're not talking. They're not getting it out, right? And some kids just aren't going to do that, especially if they maybe don't feel like they have the greatest relationship or they can't trust you, or developmentally they're in maybe the middle school range where it's like parents know nothing, my peers know everything. By the way, completely normal, but yeah, still very upsetting. So like, just be there, just be present, try not to be distracted. try to have an open body language, right? Where you're like pointed at them, you're looking at them, use all these like small things that we know make people feel more comfortable and more listened to. Asking gentle questions, right? Like, hey, I know you might not want to talk about this. I can tell something's bothering you. I'm here if you want me to be, and end of story, right? Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, what's wrong? Or like, what's bothering you? It could just be like, hey, I can tell something's upsetting you. I'm here if you want to talk about it. Okay. And if they don't, like respecting that. If you, I mean, you know your kids, if you know there's a way to kind of like get them into a situation where maybe they're more likely to come to converse, maybe, you know, you take them out and you guys go to the beach, or you go get an ice cream, or you go just hang out, whatever it is that you guys you find works best with your child. Getting everybody, you know, in a gentle space of like, do you want to talk, right? And I've always asked told parents to ask their kids, if they're talking to you about something, ask them, hey, are you coming to me for advice? Do you want me to help you fix a problem? Or do you just want me to listen? Or do you just want me to be here? Do you just want me to like, you know, hear it? And asking them that question, especially older kids, it makes a big difference, because I think a lot of times as parents, we go into problem solving mode, like immediately. We're like, oh, they've got a problem, I'm going to help them fix it, right? That's what I'm here for. And instead of doing that, initially, like ask them, do you want me to say anything? Do you want me to give you advice? Do you want me to help you problem solve? Do you just want me to listen? Do you just want me to hear you? Alejandro says, I've read that letting your child go through emotions alone to build resiliency can be good to create coping strategies that work for them. I've also read that it can instill fear of asking for help. What are your thoughts? So I think it again depends on age, and it also depends on, have you ever taught your child how to cope with the emotions? Because the first part of that makes me think like, we can't leave our kids alone to develop their own coping strategies if they've never been told or educated or like shown how to do that, right? Because to me, again, depending on the age, like kids can't do this alone. Adults can't do this alone most times. But I think once you teach them and you give them a variety of options, right? And you say like, hey, here's some things that work for me. Here's some things that you could do. Like, here's some resources. Here's like, let's talk about it, right? Like, what do you like to do? How do we decrease stress, right? Like, what have you done that's worked? Or like, what do your friends do? Like, let's kind of get a conversation going, again, depending on their age. And then you can kind of say, okay, well, here's what I do, right? And show them, right? And show them what to do, how to do it. And then you can kind of leave them to develop their own, like, oh, which one works the best? Or like, okay, try it out and like, see what you like, right? That's, I think, a maybe middle ground, because what we don't want is to be like, they have to figure it out on their own, because I don't think that's true. I don't think that kids can figure it out on their own in terms of how to handle their emotions. I think it's inherently something that we, you know, it's like like language or exposure to a lot of these other things. Psychologically, they do what we do. So I hope that answers your question. I don't think it's a good idea to let kids do it alone. I do think that it would maybe not necessarily set them up to not want to ask for help, but it certainly would and could lead to inappropriate use of coping, like negative coping, right? Yeah, I think it could lead to a whole variety of things, and possibly fear of asking for help if they don't have someone that's supportive and safe close to them, helping them through and giving them options and showing them how to do it. Yeah, they might be like terrified of doing that in the future. So that's what I think. And again, I'm not the end all be all, so we can take that into account as well. This is a big one. And this is something with the language. Maybe Alejandro, he mentioned this, is like the language that you choose to use in terms of like, I always recommend avoid telling your own story, or like well, this happened to me, and like, you know what I mean? Because unless they ask you for that, that's usually going to trigger kids, because they're, you know, they're being compared to you or compared to a sibling. Oh, well, your sibling did this, and like, why is it so hard? You know, I would say avoid like using any sort of your own type of experience. And I know that this is hard because it's like parents want to be like, well, they can relate. I can relate to them because I experienced XYZ, right? And this is similar to what they're going through. But it's always going to come across as, you know, you telling them, or almost like comparing your experience to theirs. And it never feels good, and it usually doesn't end well. So I would say try not to share your own story unless you're asked, unless your kid specifically says like, oh, hey, what did you do? Or, you know, how did you handle this? Right. Again, this is not a blanket statement to where it's like, never tell your kids anything about yourself. That's not what I'm saying. But like, if they're having a problem and they're struggling or they're stressed, like, don't come in with like, hey, well, I did this, or this happened to me. And you know what I mean? Because that usually, I find, triggers kids. The biggest part, if I could kind of lump this in with your relationship, staying calm, right? And it's one of the hardest things to do. I understand, especially when your kids are stressed and they're frustrated. I think, again, I'm definitely at an advantage, or, you know, what would we call that? Like, I definitely recognize that as a therapist, I can stay super calm when, you know, everything's hitting the fan. And that's because I've been trained to do this for years and years and years. So I recognize how hard it is for people to stay calm when it feels like, you know, everybody else is just losing it, and it's wild, and your kids are distressed and they're crying or screaming. It's like incredibly hard to stay calm, but that's the best thing that you can do to model again to your kids, right? And you're not a robot. I'm not saying like stay calm and just like wipe your emotions out, and like, no, I'm not saying that. But like, when they come to you, like, we have to do some work as parents to like, okay, man, I need to take some deep breaths because of what they just told me. And like, sometimes even doing that, modeling it, like, oh, okay, like, that's a big one. Or even like, I'm going to take some deep breaths because I'm watching you get so overwhelmed. Like, you're really overwhelmed right now. You're really upset. You're really mad. You're really sad. Like, I better take some deep breaths. Like, this is affecting me, right? Like, whatever you need to do to stay calm in that moment. And maybe that's tapping out, right? With your partner, if you have one. If you don't, like, hey, mom needs a break. I'm really overwhelmed. Like, I'm going to go take a break for 10 minutes and then I'll be back, right? Those kinds of things can really help you in your effort to stay calm. And as you do it and you practice it, right, you get better at it. So I hope that, you know, again, some preventative strategies of like using your own mindfulness, your own relaxation strategies, making sure that your own health is being cared for, whether it's like exercise to help you stay calm, to regulate, you know, all of the stress and cortisol, which I will talk about at some point, and I'll say it again, but exercise actually combats cortisol in our bodies. So I'm huge on exercise. It's like the best antidepressant on the market, and it's yeah, so stay calm, right? Like, manage your breathing, take a break if you need it. Start practicing that. And if you really struggle with it, talk about it, process it with friends. Like, why is this so hard for me? Is it because of my own stuff and my own childhood and how I handled, or how my parents handled things? Yeah, it's definitely a tough one, but a necessary one to our journey with helping our kids be more resilient. Stephanie says, I went to a parenting class. They're saying to ask questions to distract from bad behavior, but also recently I heard that new research says that this can create hostility and an adversity to wanting to answer questions. Let's see. Questions to distract from bad behavior. I don't know about that. I'd really want more context to that. Like, I don't know what age group they're talking about. And I think like and I think of a young kid, right? That comes to my mind. If they're doing something that I don't want them to do, I usually am not going to ask a question about it. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to do some active ignoring, because what we pay attention to essentially gets bigger, right? Like there's all this stuff about like positive reinforcement. When we pay attention to a negative behavior and we give the kid, whether it's negative reprimand or whatever, that's attention, right? So we're psychologically increasing, expanding upon that negative behavior. So I wouldn't ask questions to distract from bad behavior. So that one's a little bit iffy for me. I hope that answers your question, Stephanie, but yeah, I also feel like I'd have to know more about like what they're saying. Like, what did they tell you guys to do in what situations, or because there's also going to be parenting advice that I can give you that doesn't work for every kid. It doesn't work for every situation, right? So that would depend. What's the behavior, what's the age group, and what kind of questions are they asking? So okay. All right. So we'll kind of move on. Monitoring our own stress and levels of tension. I already said this, like tagging out another break, taking a break, even just vocalizing that with your kids. I also think that in my work with parents, sometimes I have parents that like maybe they function from maybe a more traditional mindset with parenting, and they're like, I don't want to be vulnerable with my kids. I can't tell them how I feel or say sorry or show them like vulnerability. And I also think a lot of us as adults just struggle in general with being vulnerable, right? So telling our kids that we're overwhelmed or we're tapped out or whatever is like sometimes like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. I don't like that, right? Because maybe it makes the dynamic different or takes away some of my authority, or some of those things, which I don't I'm not on board with. I don't think it does that. I think that your kids will actually respect you more as a parent. All right, this is kind of like perfect timing because my laptop is dying and we're close to the end. So here's some more tips to promote your own resilience. I told you guys that I always try to end with some stuff for you, right? Which is building a social network. Huge. If you don't have a social network, like social support, whether it's just a family member, it's friends, it's coworkers, people in this class that you can kind of share parenting journey and strife with, make those connections, do that for yourself. Even if it's just like a phone call or a FaceTime, going out to coffee with a friend. Your ability to avoid or stop the tendency, if you have this, to see crises is insurmountable, right? If you plummet to your bottom when like something happens, again, we're going to try to help you kind of manage that, because when you manage that, your kids right? They see that and they manage it. So kind of on the flip side, acceptance of changes in life, right? Do you set realistic, achievable, appropriate goals, and do you move towards those? Do you show them what that's like? Show them how to do it. So kind of some self-awareness, self-discovery, looking for opportunities for that. Nurturing kind of a positive sense of self. Maybe it's some positive affirmations, some self-esteem work that you can do. Maybe it's going to your own therapy, maybe going to your own counselor, maybe just, I think a lot of jobs have like the EAP thing, like the employment thing you can kind of do with self-esteem, or working on some of that if you think it's an issue. Keeping things in perspective. So like learning to do that, learning some of that negative to neutral thought flips. Taking care of yourself. I put, what is this? Because so many of us struggle as parents. Me and my husband, we talk about it all the time. I'm like, when am I allowed to work out? When am I allowed to like cook dinner? How do I do this, like do something for myself, right? We have a really fresh baby, so it's really hard for me what feels like, because I'm just pulled in a million different directions. But yeah, I think we all struggle with that for our own reasons. And maybe even just like, did your parents take care of themselves? Did they model these things? Did we inherit a lot of this stuff from our own family of origin and our own childhood? And have we worked or processed through any of that? So Ani's sharing. I'm going to go ahead and close for now. Here's some information. I'm kicking myself because I did not change this. Any questions should be directed at Ani. She has taken over, and so I'll change these with her email address. Maybe she can throw it in the chat, Ani, to let them know, because I did not put it on the screen. Here's the information for me. Like I said, that's who I am. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Yeah, that's it for tonight. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If not, I am so appreciative that so many of you came and made time for yourselves and for your kids in your parenting journey. I am super excited about next session, which is the 24th. We're going to be talking a little bit about boundaries and communication. I can maybe come up with some language that we can use to better assist our kids. And yeah, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Let me know. And I am excited to see you guys all.